Welcome to Shoot Like a Girl, a podcast featuring interviews with extraordinary military women from around the world who push their limits on and off duty. I'm your host, Kate Stewart, and this is episode number 3. Today's guest is Jessica Lynn Wiebe. Jessica is a former Canadian artillery soldier who deployed to Afghanistan on Task Force 108. Following her military service, she pursued a career in art and was accepted to the Canadian Forces Artist Program through the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. Jessica has a really interesting story to tell, and I hope you enjoy listening.
Steady, steady, nice and steady. Light, hill, cover. I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
So you better get out of my way now.
So you better get out of my way now.
Before I roll all over you.
Before I roll all over you.
Welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Brandon, Manitoba, so I was born and raised there, and that's where I joined the military as well.
Do you have any military members in your family?
The only family member who served was my grandfather in World War II.
So, what made you interested in joining?
It's really weird. I had just turned 18. I was in grade 12, and I went to the bar, and I met this artillery gunner who was about to deploy to Afghanistan. And I just said, I could never do that job. And he said, it's amazing what you can put your body through, and that a lot of it's in your mind. And I thought, oh, yeah, well, maybe. But didn't think much of it until a few months later when I was looking for summer jobs, and Join the Reserves popped up for $5,000. And it made a lot of sense. You join, you do your basic training, and you only have to commit to one weekend and one evening a week every month, which made a lot of sense for university. But I joined and I loved it. So I like routine, I like discipline. So I think I kind of thrived. And yeah, I went from high school where I did nothing but like musical theater and drama and choir and art, and jumped into the military. So
the complete opposite almost.
Yes, my family had bets on how long I would last, but because of the routine and discipline and the challenge, I'm super stubborn. I guess maybe a more positive word would be tenacious. But I like to push myself. When I decide I'm doing something, I jump and I'm fully in it. It was interesting though, because at the beginning of that summer and basic training, that was 2006. And it was there was a lot happening in Afghanistan at that time, and it was in the news every day. I didn't really understand the situation over there, and they were planning on TF 108 to send a lot more reservists over, and so I had joined as a reservist. And I remember at the beginning of basic training, they said, put your hand up if you're planning on going overseas in 2008. And there was just 2 of us that didn't have our hands up. But it wasn't until that September I got back to my home unit, and I met a group of guys that I just got back, and just hearing their stories and experiences over there, I had this really, I don't know how to describe it, but like a gut feeling that it was something that I needed to do. So I went to my warrant that day. So that fall, I did my artillery trades course on weekends, and I finished that like the end of February and jumped right into workup training that end of March. So I wasn't even in a year before I started my workup training to get overseas.
Wow, that's super quick.
Yeah.
And as someone in the combat arms, were there other women in your coursing?
I was in the reserve, so there was a decent amount of women, still very few compared to the men. But then at my unit, there was still a handful of us. And my workup training, I trained at 1RCHA, and there was 3 troops, and I was in the 1 troop that there was no women. So I was the only one for the workup training.
And what was that experience like for you? Did you feel out of place, or did you feel like you just sort of fit in with everyone?
I guess I learned to fit in. I guess like if you look at social constructs of like being feminine, I'm a very I'm very much a girly girl, but I always felt with the military that I had to try and be a little tougher than I actually was. So just grappled with that a little bit. I did have some not so good experiences with that troop. And before being deployed in 2008, I was transferred to 2 PPCLI to join the transport platoon that was being set up last minute to do resupply convoys overseas. So I was supposed to be a right seater and do security. So I got overseas, and my experience with 2 PPCLI was phenomenal. There's a lot of things that I hadn't been trained to do because I jumped in so quickly. A lot of the qualifications I got during workup training, like my first military vehicle was the G-Wagon. My second was a T-Lab. So I did none of the regular vehicles that you're supposed to do first.
So what exactly is a right seater for those listening?
Oh, since I didn't have like the 10-ton qualifications, I would sit in the right seat during convoys. And when you had to get out and do your 5 and 20s and clear the road around the vehicle, when you stopped during a convoy and check for IEDs, that would be me. So I got over, I did one convoy up to Fob Frontenac, and then I got back and my warrant noticed that I had a T-Lab qualification. And so just to clarify that, I did the T-Lab course with 1RCHA, but I was supposed to be like the backup driver.
Okay.
And it was a 2-week course, and I drove it for like maybe 20 minutes on that course. And so I got overseas and I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be driving T-Lab. And it was for part of this road construction project that they were setting up in Zari along Route Langley. I lived in Combat Outpost Pulchican, and we basically I was put into like a security, like road construction project was to hire local Afghans to build roads, fix ditches and irrigation systems.
Mm-hmm.
And we would clear the road, provide security, and they would come in, work for the day, and then we would go back to the combat outpost. So that's what I ended up doing for my entire tour. I spent a few months out in Pulchican on Route Langley, and then I was up in Wilson, then we went down to Massamgar where the very first road project was set up. And we worked there for a few months, and then we went back up to Wilson and drove down Route Summit every day to set up a smaller road project at one of the combat outposts on that road. So
while you were doing this, did you guys encounter a lot of IEDs every day that you had to clear before they could then start construction?
So on Route Langley, it was very weird. So the combat outpost Pulchican was like a mud compound, basically.
Okay.
And there's a wadi system on each side, and it was right beside a local village. So every day, someone in the village had to come and ask for permission from us to open and close the wadi system to irrigate the fields.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think since we had control over those wadis, we were never hit there, but it felt like we were kind of like the eye of the storm, so everything was happening around us. So I found that really interesting, and it wasn't till like we got down to Massamgar where you're rocketed every day. And on Route Summit, I personally am very fortunate that I never came across any IEDs, but seeing vehicles that had been hit was really hard, and hearing them get hit, that was always really difficult. It always made my stomach kind of drop. Yeah, that was and then we got hit one day on that road, and that was about it for us. So we were very fortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could imagine that, every day going out the door, if you know that you're going to be driving or traveling on one of those roads, it would be such a strange feeling just knowing what could potentially be out there.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever really felt like scared. You kind of turn off a lot of emotions and you just are doing your job. It's constantly there, and I go with my gut a lot of the time. And yeah, there was one day, or early on in the tour, I remember there was orders that came down that drivers had to put tourniquets on their legs before heading out for convoys because you're in a smaller space and you're harder to get to,
Right.
and you're right beside the engine. And I remember doing this for a few convoys, and then it came down again that you don't have to do that. But just because I just kept doing it. Yeah, it was a superstitious thing, but it's weird to like put tourniquets on your legs and just like think about not having legs every time you hop into a vehicle.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it was the Americans that they had something in their uniform where it was like a built-in tourniquet in the sleeves and the pants.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to verify that. That would be kind of like an eerie feeling. It's like you're putting on these tourniquets before you get in your vehicle to go driving.
Yeah, but then again, it becomes just normal. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, I guess I'd imagine that the things that you get desensitized to while you're on deployment are definitely
Yeah.
something that the civilian population would find hard to understand.
Yeah, definitely. And like when we were in Masamgar, we were rocketed every night, usually around like dinner time, so you knew what time it was to eat. I never really took it too seriously to like always put my full fighting order on to like walk across to get to like the dinner tent. And so one night I was just talking to my mom on the satellite phone and I had a weird feeling. So I was sitting on top of like a pile of wood by the front gate. And I had a weird feeling. So I hopped off. I said, I got to go. I'll talk to you when I can. And I walked around the corner of the sea containers where we were sleeping, and a rocket detonated off a tree about 20 meters from us, and I got hit with shrapnel on my back. But it's weird because had I not had that feeling and got off the pile of wood, it would have been a lot worse because it was right out in the open. But after that, I was a lot more aware of throwing my frag vest on and my helmet, walking over to the dinner tent.
That's like some sort of sixth sense. That's crazy.
Yeah, but you hear about that kind of thing a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And so how long was your deployment?
6 months.
Okay.
So yeah, so I was actually on one of the later chalks to get there, and one of like the middle chalks leaving, I guess. I landed I think March, and then I came home mid-September.
While you were there, did you deal with the locals at all, with the Afghans, and how was their attitude towards you?
We did. With the road projects, we were working right with the local Afghans, and it was all men. And it was interesting. I definitely believe that 60% of the Afghans working for us were most likely connected to the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
We got some information from them, and I'm sure they got information about us as well. There was a lot of friendly faces, lots of smiles. We had our interpreters, so we had conversations. But there were like some men that just would not look me in the eyes, and I had like some bad feelings when I felt that. And I definitely had to, I hate saying this, but grow some balls and not be afraid to yell at people and be assertive, because you have to, even when it's children. So that was an interesting part of that. There was one old man who would bring me gifts every day.
Okay. What kind of stuff
So
did he
it
bring
could
you?
be I would get food like naan, or one day he brought me this green scarf with like gold embroidery all over it. And my interpreter said that that's what you get on your wedding day. So there's like lots of jokes and stuff around that. But yeah, and even like the Afghan National Police would set up an outer cordon around our cordon, and so we developed a little bit of a relationship with them as well. And one of like their officers would bring like fresh tomatoes and things like that we probably weren't allowed to eat actually, but we did anyways.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would imagine it would almost be insulting if they brought you these gifts and then you didn't eat them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you would always see like the men walking ahead of the women. And I did have to search some women as well in Masamgar. So before any of the locals on that road project that live along the road project, they would have to be searched before coming on the road. And for a long time, the women weren't. And that could be a severe threat if a man put a burqa on.
Right.
And so I started searching the women as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, that would just be such an easy way to escape detection. If the women weren't being searched, you
Yeah,
would just never know.
exactly. Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
your most memorable story from deployment?
Oh God. There's a lot of really funny things. The one that I do think about lots as a woman, one night I was doing the tower duty, and this man walked by with his child, and the woman was quite far behind. And when she came closer, I took my helmet off and I just waved and said, like, hello, assalamu alaikum. And she actually lifted her burqa up and smiled.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that, yeah, so that was quite shocking. So yeah, that moment has always really stuck with me, seeing that, maybe it was knowing that I have a job that's equal to the man beside me, and what's possible. And that's something I kind of thought a little bit about in that moment. So
Yeah, I always kind of wonder. I
yeah,
mean, it must be so different for them with like their daily lives and what they go through, and then sort of, I guess, sort of growing up and just being in that world where like, okay, this is a woman's role, and you're looking after the kids, and you're cooking, and you're doing this, and you're in the house, and you're wearing a burqa, and then they come out and they see these women from other countries who are, like you said, like they're just working alongside doing the same job as men,
Yeah,
no head
preparing the life.
coverings. What do they think about that? It's kind
Yeah,
of
it was something I thought
interesting
about. Yeah.
from, the men's perspective.
There is that. Yeah, I remember when we were in Wilson, one of the I can't think of the name of the trade right now when you do construction.
Oh, like
You know,
combat engineer?
not combat engineer. It doesn't
Construction
matter.
tech, maybe? Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But they had like an ongoing joke with one of the delivery truck guys for how many goats I was were at one
Oh,
point.
okay.
And they just but they would do that with all the women as a joke. And I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know, I think they think you're being serious. I actually have a picture with him. It was really, really the older man on the road.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he wouldn't stop looking at me. He wouldn't like look at the camera. He just like stared right at me.
Yeah.
And I asked the other soldier who took the photo to send it to me, and I emailed it to my mom, but I didn't get a chance to tell her the story at that point. So when I got home from my tour, she had printed multiple copies of it and put them in frames and gave them all to my family members.
Nice.
And so they're still up in everyone's home. It's like really, it's the most awkward photo. I look very uncomfortable.
That's so funny. At least there's a funny story behind it. So then after deployment, there's a decompression period, is there not, in
We're in Cyprus.
Cyprus? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we had, I think it's 3 days in Cyprus to decompress. And then when I got back to Canada, I literally, the day I landed and got back to Shiloh, I cleared out of the base and was technically back at my reserve unit, but you have like your leave days afterwards. And then when my leave finished, I immediately signed a Class B contract to work at WOTC, which is one of the training facilities in Shiloh.
Okay.
And so I worked there for a year. And then at that point, I was kind of feeling a little bit done with the military. Maybe a little bitter. I don't know. I don't think I was processing my feelings very well at that point. But I went back to my unit and I asked about like time off. And so in the reserves, you can get ED&T.
Yeah, excuse duty and training.
Yes, and since I had just done a tour and I did like I basically did all full-time contracts through my reserve time. And they said, oh yeah, you can take 6 months to a year. It's not a problem. And so I took off traveling for that entire time. And I went to New Zealand and Bali and Southeast Asia, through to India and Nepal, a little bit of Europe, and came home. But when I came home, I realized I had some things I had to face. And I think I was running away from dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be completely transparent because I think it's important to share these things with other people. So if other people are dealing with them, they know they're not alone. But eventually, after I came home, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And my secondary condition, I had developed an eating disorder. So when I came home, I think I just started trying to control everything around me. And I did a lot of exercising and started eating really healthy and just started going down the wrong road.
Okay.
So at the point when I asked for time off from the military, I was dealing with those things already, didn't know it was connected. So when I got home from my time traveling, I ended up being hospitalized because I only weighed 110 pounds. I'm 5'6", so it's not very good.
Oh my God. Yeah, I'm 5'6" and I weigh like 150 right now. Jeez.
Yeah, and I think I dropped to 108 while in hospital,
Wow.
and I was just I just didn't want to accept or work on whatever it was. And so following that, my unit was like, okay, I think we need to start getting you some help. And so I went through like the process of going to see the counselor on base. And I guess you're supposed to receive a psych test when you get home. And since I cleared out of the base so quick and got back to my unit and jumped into a contract, I didn't ever get a psych test. And so at that time, they acknowledged the eating disorder, but didn't acknowledge it with military service and didn't see any connection or relation to that whatsoever. And so I got a little frustrated and I don't know, I wanted to run away again. But
Yeah.
so I applied to art school in Halifax. I always wanted to go to art school. And so I applied, I went, I was told I probably shouldn't until I received the help that I need. I have no idea how I survived that first year, but as like my once a month duty as a reservist, I would go to Stadacona for my medical appointments, and eventually a psychiatrist there made the connection between PTSD and the eating disorder, and I was medically released from the military. And yeah, it's interesting. I started doing a lot of research on the gender differences with PTSD or trauma. A lot of the symptoms are like alcoholism, drug addiction, sex
Hmm.
addiction, all of those things. But women sometimes, like the symptoms are the same, but they manifest differently. So sometimes I guess eating disorders are not connected. So there's still a lot of research being done. I'm very embarrassed to admit that that's how I dealt with it, but it is what it is. And
When you're going through something like that, you're not always thinking clearly and you're sort of trapped inside of that bubble and you can't see. Like it's hard to step outside and sort of see like, okay, what's the best way to deal with this?
yeah,
And,
and you're also malnourished, so it's hard to make
yeah.
proper decisions and think clearly.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Yeah, but I'm very lucky that I did receive the help that I need, and I still see regular psychologists. I have a dietitian, and I weigh a regular weight now. So I'm in my
Hmm.
mid 125, 128. So everything's pretty normal now. I still have things I have to deal with, but I think it was going to art school and actually processing a lot of those things in school when I hadn't planned on doing that. But what I've learned, like with my work, like I think it's important to be vulnerable and share those experiences because you just never know who else is out there who might be in the same boat as you once were. So, and I really struggled to get the help that I needed. It took a lot of years, and there's still very little research out there that connects eating disorders with PTSD, but it's a form of control. So
Hmm.
it's just, yeah. So I don't like to share, but I do need to share. I
Yeah.
think it's important. I see the value in that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you said that you were doing a lot of arts and theater in high school. Is that where that came from, that you suddenly sort of wanted to go back to that? Or how did you make the decision on art school? And also, why Halifax?
Oh yeah, I actually came to Halifax in grade 10 for this band and vocal jazz trip. I know it sounds so dorky, but we came out for a jazz festival, and I fell in love with Halifax then, and I thought the city was just incredibly beautiful. So that was kind of always in the back of my head. And when I was had first joined the military and doing my artillery trades course on weekends, I was doing a full-time degree. So I started doing general studies for that first year, and I took a visual arts course, and the professor told me that I should look into majoring in fine art. And I kind of laughed because I was really focused on the military at that time. And so that was
Right.
always in my head as well. And when I traveled, I kind of came back to drawing again and painting, and kind of had already started making that shift. So when I got to Halifax, I chose the Nova Scotia College for Art and Design, and I had no intention to make work about the military or my experiences.
Hmm.
But it kind of just happened naturally. And I started to like look at images from Afghanistan. I started to make drawings and paintings and make connections with the Army Museum that's located in the Citadel. And they wanted to exhibit my work. And that was kind of like the takeoff. And so in school, I don't know, art school, you make personal work, you experiment, you play, and I ended up making a lot of work, just trying to express my experience and navigate those. But when I got out of school, I started to look at war and conflict and the military more broadly, and I
Hmm.
started to work with community organizations and start to collaborate more, which has led to the work that I'm making today.
So did you find that almost like a therapeutic process to get into that and to make that artwork after your experiences in the military?
Yes, I think so. It was very cathartic for me. And it doesn't like people say that, art can be very cathartic and it doesn't have to be art, it can be art. And there was that
Hmm.
as well. But for me to have that space and have the support of my peers and professors to dig into that work was extremely helpful. It was encouraged. And yeah, it kind of helped me see things a bit more clearly. And so at one point, I even started a military art program at the Military Family Resource Center in my last year of my degree, and had a lot of veterans and serving military members come and make art once a week. So that was really nice to kind of engage with the community here because I had lost
Oh, cool.
when I
Yeah.
moved out here for school.
Did
Yeah,
you find
and
that sort of disconnect? Like the military community is so close and you're sort of around all these like minded people, and going to art school, now you're around a totally different crowd and they might not relate to some of your experiences.
it was definitely hard. I felt like my perspective was very different from a lot of the people in my classes, just having served in Afghanistan and coming home. And I think in the art world, I think it's very critical of the military and war, but
Yes.
also
Yeah.
there's a lot of artists that are really engaged in that work. So I know that sometimes like we would always have really long critiques where you go through everyone's work and you talk about it and you ask questions. I do think people held back questions and maybe opinions, maybe in fear of like hurting my feelings or something. But I really wanted to figure out if the work stood for itself and not just that like the work is good and not that it's just my experience that they're looking at. So I really tried to articulate that entering those critiques.
Right.
So I got a lot of interesting feedback from people and really engaging conversation. And so that's where I started to notice this large gap between military experience and civilian understanding of that experience. So now with my work, I really want to create work that can bring veterans, serving military members, and civilians together to engage in those difficult conversations on war and conflict in the military, to listen to each other's perspectives, but in a safe space. So usually it's around like building an installation or something like that. So I can give you an example of one of the works that I've done where I did that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'll do I guess the most recent one I did was for Nocturne last fall. So Nocturne's like Halifax's Art at Night. So there's art installations all over the city. And so I proposed to build a makeshift military checkpoint and install it at the Barrington Street entrance of the Halifax Grand Parade, which is a war memorial.
Right. Yeah.
And so basically, the purpose was to create the military checkpoint to reroute viewers around the pre-existing war memorial. So to show that, well, one, the profound power dynamic of a checkpoint. And so viewers can stand on either side and feel that. And two, by being rerouted, it expresses how people's lives are rerouted daily in war and conflict zones around the world. So it kind of acknowledges that in a country where we are directly impacted by war and conflict, but we don't see it. So to have people stop and pause for a moment to think about that. And so I collaborated with the Veteran Farm Project in just outside of Windsor, Nova Scotia. And they provided the space, and we had veterans, serving military members and civilians come out and build the work together. So my work is very collaborative, very community engaged, and so we can have that time to really dig into those conversations, which I think is really important.
Nice. Yeah, I think so too. And, when I was living in Toronto for a couple of years and I was at the reserve unit there, every summer we would be part of the military display at the CNE, at the Canadian National Exhibition. And so they would have, the Army Reserve units from close by would bring in a lav, and one of the units there, the Queen's Own Rifles, has an airborne section. So they would bring in some of their gear people can try on and that sort of thing. And then we would have our little Navy section. And, it's kind of interesting from going from a place like Halifax or Victoria, where it's a very Navy-centric city and there's a large military presence, to being in Toronto, where there are reserve units, but people don't necessarily see them and they don't necessarily know a whole lot about the military. And just even speaking with some of the people who came by to look at the displays, they're like, oh, Canada has a Navy? Like, do we have ships? And, a lot of people just didn't even know. So it's, I wish that people would take that time to just learn a little bit more about the military and what we do. And even recently, when there was the helicopter crash off the HMCS Fredericton, and it's not ever a good thing to read the comment section on Facebook, but people are making comments like, oh, bring our troops home, and what are we doing over there anyways? Canada's not at war, and they should read about the mission and op reassurance. And to them, it's like, okay, Afghanistan's over, Canadians aren't deployed ever. Well, that's not true. There's tons of ships that go out for 6 months out of the year, and even more than that doing workups, and Army troops going to the Ukraine and Latvia and all these different places, and Canadians don't know about it.
I know, it's hard, and it's kind of like a little heartbreaking when you're in the military, because they just don't know. And it creates this confusion. And I think the military is kind of like a vessel, and like everything should just stay there. And then like everything in civilian life should stay over there, but they spill into each other. But if you're not related to someone in the military, or don't have friends in the military, you don't get that spillover. And so my goal as an artist is to hopefully have more opportunities to do more of that work and connect more of those things. I was accepted to the Canadian Forces Artist Program in January 2018 out of the War Museum in Ottawa. So there's a program there that opens up every 2 years, and artists can apply to be embedded with the Canadian military in Canada or abroad. and they will be embedded for 7 to 14 days, and then they come home and develop a body of work that is exhibited. Technically it's supposed to be like 2 years after, but ends up being about 4.
Okay.
Exhibited at the War Museum in Ottawa. So it's having artists make that work to share the experiences and share with Canadians and the general public what the military is doing. But that's really the only program that does that. And so I'm very lucky that I got accepted and joined like a lineage of artists, war artists from World War I and II. And I proposed to be embedded in Ukraine on Op Unifier. So I was embedded in December 2018. I flew in just a couple days after they declared martial law with the active aggression in the Sea of Azov.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I spent 8 days with the military. And what was nice about that experience is a lot of the artists in the program are civilian artists who have no military experience.
Are there many of those artists that are veterans, or are you sort of like a one of?
There's only a handful that have actually been part of that program, other than like the artists in World War I and II when they were like properly embedded.
Mm-hmm.
Scott Waters is an amazing artist to look up. His work is incredible, and he's done the program 2 times. And also there's the artist Ted Zuber, who deployed to Korea and fought there.
Okay.
And it wasn't until 20 years after the fact he realized there was no artistic documentation of that war. So he made these incredible paintings that are hyper realistic from memory of his experiences fighting there. And they're in the collection at the War Museum, and there's other collections that are not collections, but other army museums that have prints of his work. But yeah, the one thing that was super beneficial or was an asset is that when I got over to Ukraine, there was no relationship building that had to be done. Like I said, hey, my name's Jessica. I was an artillery gunner. I deployed to Afghanistan on TF-108. It was an immediate, okay, you understand kind of thing. So it's like you can meet anyone in the military and you can just jump into a conversation.
Yes.
So that really helped with that experience getting over there. It was weird being a civilian with the military. That was a little bit jarring at first, but it was a really wonderful experience. And then I spent the rest of the month independent of the military, like traveling around Ukraine. And I was very fortunate that I was invited to attend the Halifax International Security Forum a couple weeks before going. And so I met a contact there who connected me on the ground with politicians, diplomats, different non-government organizations and journalists to meet as I traveled. And I was able to interview them to really dig into the bigger picture of what's happening in Ukraine and not just the military perspective. Yeah, and just to talk to like everyday people. So my goal going in was to look at the history of war and the architecture of war and how it impacts the political and economic climate and continues to push the war in the East.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super fascinated that they're fighting in like Russian style trench systems and old bunkers, and then they've got like new technology, and it's this battle lab and the world's watching. So I find that super interesting. So I really wanted to get into that.
While you were embedded with the troops, what would a day look like for you?
Get up bright and early. And each day they had kind of like, okay, you're going to go with the infantry today, you're going to go with the artillery tomorrow, you're going to go with the engineers on Wednesday. And so we'd show up at the CAT-G, the Combined Arms Training Group.
Okay.
So we would go to the Combined Arms Training Group, so CAT-G, every morning. And then we would meet up with the soldiers that we were going to go out and document the training exercise that day that's happening in the field.
Are you drawing these, or are you like taking pictures?
I chose to photograph and take video.
Okay.
So and interview people along the way. It was really interesting though, because like there was one other artist that was embedded, Olivia Rosema, and she's a sculptor and has no military experience. And it was interesting to see how she would really stay with the soldiers, whereas I would like see tanks backing into their positions and I would just follow them in. I felt very comfortable doing that, do something and then ask questions later. And since I have been through the training myself and I understand how everything works, I felt very comfortable knowing when I'm safe and when I'm not safe. Mm-hmm. And so that made a big difference for the documentation that I did get coming home.
And while you're over there, are you staying on a base or are you at a hotel?
No, we were right on the base,
Okay.
and we slept in the same building that all the Canadian soldiers did. So we
Okay.
bunked. We had this little section for the women, and in like a larger big room, basically, that had been like cordoned off with little wooden, I guess, like bed spaces. I don't know what you would call it. So we were right in there with them. So it was very comfortable. Well, I mean, as comfortable as like the
Army style
military
comfort.
is,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was good, and we ate in the same messes, and it was a lot of like with the base there. It was a lot of driving to and from the training area in the field and back to get to like where the exercise was happening. So we got there at the end of the roto of Ukrainian soldiers that were going through, and they were in their final week-long field exercise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would
Sorry.
be interesting sort of going back as a civilian, like you would have that level of comfort where you're just, you know what everything is, you know, the routine, that sort of thing. Whereas going in and being a civilian, like, you know, they're probably intimidated by a lot of things.
Yeah, so just knowing like military language, how the institution runs as a whole was super beneficial. Whereas I can't imagine not knowing anything about the military and going in and trying to understand that in 8 days on like an
Yeah.
exercise
It would
overseas.
just be like, what is going on?
Yeah, but there's also like a positive to that, to like having fresh eyes and seeing
Hmm.
things with a completely different perspective. So I found with Olivia and there's a lot of things that she pointed out. She's like, "What are they doing?" And I'm like, "They're doing this or whatever." And she's like, "That's weird."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
or just like, or things that I just thought were everyday banal parts of the military, she was super fascinated by.
Yeah.
So it made me notice things that I would not have noticed otherwise. So that was super helpful for the actual project alone. Yeah.
Very
So
interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that even I think a lot of people in the Canadian Forces don't even know about the artist in residence program.
Yeah, and it was really funny over there because our first night I went to the mess to eat, and I could feel some guy just turning around and kept looking at me out of the corner of my eyes, and I was like, "What is this guy looking at?" And so I looked over, and we made eye contact, and it was one of my friends from back home who I served with.
Oh,
So
neat.
it was nice. Yeah, so it was nice to bump into someone I knew as well.
That is the other funny thing about the Canadian Forces is that, you know, it's
It's so
always such a
small.
small world. Yeah, when you think of the size of the states and their military, and they probably like you go to basic training and then you never see these people again in your life. And there's so many people all over the place. But I find the Canadian Forces, yeah, it is so small. And then you do bump into these people that you've met at different events or that you've deployed with. You know, it is so small.
hmm
Talk about a little bit about the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yay!
Yeah, so that was, I mean, I found that it was so funny because I saw that you liked the page on Instagram and then I sort of clicked on your profile and I have about half of a degree from OCAD actually. So I was like, oh, art stuff. Oh, it's super cool. And then I looked and I saw that you had been in the forces and I'm like, oh, that's even cooler. And then I looked and I saw the BJJ pictures. So I was like, okay, yeah, I have to have her on the podcast.
I think it's super cool that you have half of an art degree, so you
Yeah.
understand what I'm talking about, those different perspectives in art
Yeah,
school.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, how did you get
Okay.
into BJJ?
I had started doing Muay Thai for a couple of years through this studio in Halifax called Our Studios. They have 3 different locations. So they've got like yoga and Pilates and a lot of other things. And I met a friend doing yoga, and her husband's been training jujitsu for years. And him and his friend were opening a new gym in Halifax. And it was going to be a non for profit and very community based. And she had never tried jujitsu and always wanted to. And she came to class one day and said, you know, I think you should join me. I think you'll like it. And so I joined her when they opened the gym. And it was like, at first I was like, kind of had the giggles because it just looked really funny. And then once you start doing it and you understand the positions and start getting the technique, it just becomes obsessive. It's so much fun. And I mean, at first I would be trying to do something and my body would just not do what I was thinking I was trying to do. And I just didn't have the awareness. But then things start to click and it just becomes more and more addictive. And it's such a technical game. And being a smaller person, I was able to still do things as long as I applied the technique. So it's pretty cool now when you go to roll with a really big guy and you can keep them from passing your guard. It feels really good.
I don't do jujitsu and I feel like I should really start soon. But I mean, when you see videos or you see someone actually do it where they're smaller and they can just totally control someone, especially if that other person doesn't know any jujitsu, then it's like game over.
Yeah, you should definitely start as soon as you can. It's just fun. was like, am I too old for this? Because it just wasn't around when I was younger.
Mm.
And I'm so glad I did. I wish I could have started younger, but that's not the case, and that's okay. But yeah, that was like the most interesting thing with jujitsu is you can be the smaller guy or you can be the bigger guy. You could be tall, you could be short. It doesn't matter what size your body is. You develop your game based on that. And so it's for everyone, age like young or old. So that really made me more excited about it in the first place. And I also had heard Joe Rogan talk about it for years. And so finally doing it, I'm like, oh God, I get it.
Yeah, and that's the thing
um,
too. Like I listen to so many of these podcasts and they're always talking about jujitsu and I'm like, oh, I feel like I need to start so that I know exactly what they're talking about. But it's funny because one of the things that Joe Rogan mentioned was, I guess Anthony Bourdain started jujitsu like really late in life. I think in his 60s or something, like he started and then he just got super into it.
It's hard not to. I think you either get into it or you don't. There's like no in between.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from people, like that same idea that you're just addicted to it and trying, and it's like a problem solving sport
Yes,
as well.
it's really good for the brain. Like it's constant problem solving. I think that's what I like the most about it. And there's a lot of lessons that I've learned on the mat that apply off the mat. I don't know if I can think of an example, but if someone's got you pinned down and you can't move, you've got no space, it's hard to breathe. You just have to like slow yourself down, try and stay calm, breathe if you can, wait, make space, and then get out. And so I find like in anything, when you get stressed in life, if something comes up or it's out of your control, just breathe, wait, and it will pass, make space and keep moving. So it's like there's those it's constantly drilled in because you're constantly purposefully putting yourself in shitty positions and then trying to work your way out of them. So you can't not get stronger because of that.
Right. Obviously there's strong people, but it's not always about using that strength and being tense
Mm-mm.
and just trying to go as hard as you can. It like you said, you've got to relax and make that space. And sometimes you need to just wait it out instead of, I guess, going full force with everything all the time.
Yes, yeah. You can't just like go full force against a rock. You've got to, what is it? Bruce Lee, be water, my friend. You
Yes.
know, just
Yeah.
move around that obstacle. And it's exactly what it is with jujitsu. The more you try to force something, it's just not going to happen. And of course, when you first start, you are all over the place, like your arms, your like all your limbs, until you start to figure out the positions and what you're actually trying to go for, and then start connecting things, and then start sequencing and baiting and trying to get submissions and things like that. But yeah, I'm still very new. I've only been doing it for I guess I passed the 2-year mark right as COVID struck, and so I guess 2.5 years technically, but we didn't train for 4 months. So I'm still very new. I still have lots to learn, and you'll always be learning, even when you're a black belt. You're constantly learning. It's limitless, and so that's what I really like about it. So I'm not really worried about what belt I'm at or where I am. I'm in it for the long run. So I just try to take in each class and be present. And it's hard not to be present. You kind of have to be present when you're rolling, which is nice
Yeah.
because it's the one place I can be. And when I'm rolling, I'm not thinking about anything else in my life. It's just thinking about the next move. And I really love that about it.
One of the interesting things that I find about jujitsu is that they're not in a hurry to give out belts. You have to really take the time and earn it. You see all these places, Taekwondo gyms that advertise like black belt program, get your black belt in 2 years. Growing up, it's always like, oh, so-and-so has their black belt. And that sounded super cool and prestigious. And like, how can you have a program where you're guaranteeing that someone is going to get their black belt in 2 years? You know what I mean? And then you listen to people who are really into jujitsu and they're like, no, if a gym is saying that you're going to get whatever belt in X amount of time, don't even go to that gym because that's not the way it should be.
Yeah. I feel very grateful because I train at Halifax BJJ Society, and we're affiliated with Marcelo Garcia, who's like one of the greatest of all time grapplers. And such a privilege, such an honor. And what's nice about that is we get a lot of his world-class athletes coming up and running seminars at our gym in Halifax, and we can go down and train in New York and get exposed to what that's like. And so, you know, if you're training full time at Marcelo's gym, like you'll get your black belt a lot sooner, but that's your, like your job, it's like your profession kind of
you're
thing.
putting in the work.
Yeah, whereas usually they'll take up to like 10 years or so, give or take, to get that black belt. But there's such a mentality at our gym that it's not about that. It's about just keep showing up, keep putting in the hard work, be a good teammate, create an inclusive space, be very inviting. Like, I can't say I've ever seen someone walk into the gym who's never been there, who hasn't been greeted within like 20 to 30 seconds by a teammate or a coach, to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, welcome to our gym. We train Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, blah, 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 and have a conversation and get more and more people involved. Our gym has grown massively in the 2+ years that it's been open. And I think it really comes down to that positive attitude. And you see Marcelo Garcia, he's one of like the kindest, nicest people. He always is smiling. He remembers your name. And you're like, Marcelo Garcia remembers my name? Like, I'm no one. So it's really cool to see that. And I've gone down to New York a couple times to train and compete at the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation competitions. And it's really cool to see Marcelo and all of the coaches there running around trying to coach everyone on the team, including affiliated teams. Seeing them run down to coach my coach was one of the most incredible things I've ever witnessed. It was just, again, that being part of something that's greater than yourself. And that's something that I felt when I was in the military and that I didn't have for so long. And now with jiu-jitsu, I feel a lot of that and that family and that camaraderie and that shared experience just in a different way. So
that is that same kind of like close-knit tight community that's, you know, that shared interest. And it's interesting now too that they're sort of bringing that into the military with the grappling competitions and stuff that they're having.
Yes, I go last June to Petawawa to document, take photos and interview soldiers at the military combatives grappling concentration. It was a lot of fun and I participated in like the open mat. The reason I went is because I write for a jiu-jitsu company called Akiro Jiu-Jitsu. And so I get to interview athletes and just put blog posts up on their website. And so I mentioned the military combatives. I'm like, we have to go cover this. And of course they say, come on over, we'll make sure you get some roles in that first night and we'll introduce you to everyone. And so it was really cool to see that and experience that. I hope one day they have like a veteran part of the competition, maybe like an absolute round or something with like serving members and veterans. But I think liability reasons the military just can't do that yet.
Yeah, it would be cool to have a veterans category there.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool. But it was really nice to see that in the military. And as of January, I started heading up to Shearwater and train with the guys up there because they also cross-train at Halifax BJJ. So that's how I met them. So I try to get up there and train there and still stay connected with the military. And that's how I feel with my artwork as well. I can stay connected and support veterans and serving members, but just like in a different capacity now.
So what are your goals for the future?
I've got lots.
Okay.
I mean, once to get my black belt one day. I'm just kidding. But that is up there. Super lame saying that. I'm so sorry.
No, that's an awesome goal.
I just got really excited for some reason. With my artwork, I really hope to look for more opportunities to embed with the military. I talked to Brigadier General Jay Jansen over the past few months, and he connected me with some PAO officers across Canada to look for some opportunities. And I did hear back from the Royal Canadian Navy in Halifax here. I got accepted to the Canadian Leaders at Sea program.
Okay, yeah, where they go out on a ship.
Yeah, so I'll get the opportunity to do that once everything, like all the restrictions kind of lift through COVID, to be embedded for a little bit and document what's going on the ships and make some work about it. And I'll have work from the Canadian Forces Artist Program at the War Museum in February 2022. So just continuing to make the work, look for opportunities, train jiu-jitsu, and that's about it.
And so is the Artist in Residence program, is that something that you can do multiple times?
You can apply multiple times. Only, I think it's 5 to 6 artists get chosen every 2 years. So it's very competitive. So I thought that maybe I should start looking outside of that program for more opportunities. So far, so good. I also heard back from the Canadian Army as well as the Canadian Forces Special, what was it?
CANSOFCOM?
Yes, thank you.
Canadian Special Operations Forces Command.
Yeah, thank you. I was flipping everything around. Yeah, so that would be an ultimate dream to actually be embedded somewhere there, whether it's in training or something else, just to start to make work and share what the Canadian military is doing. There's a lot of really amazing operations around the world that people are completely unaware of, like you said. And I think it's important to get that information out there and be a bit more transparent with what our military is doing.
For sure. And what advice would you give to like a young woman wanting to join the Canadian Forces?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I can tell you the advice I was given.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I didn't really
Um,
receive any because my family didn't know anything about the military.
yeah, it's interesting. I was told by the officer when I went in to just do my medical and my aptitude test, and it was a female officer, and she said, "Never let a man carry your bag for you."
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
yeah, that's good advice.
and that's pretty tough advice. And of course, you work as a team, so their strengths and weaknesses and everything balances out. But be tough, even though I don't know. Advice to women in the military is like be tough, be strong. But it's like I don't want to say I don't want to like force those things on people the way it was forced on me. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to catch myself the way I'm saying that. I have to find a better way to express those feelings.
And that being said, like I've seen men carry other men's bags for them, right? It's not just women, but I think that the magnifying glass is on you a little more.
Yes, yes. I think that to give a piece of advice would be that there is a place for you within the military,
Hmm.
um, and to use that platform and speak up, and don't hold back if you have an opinion or an idea. Share your ideas when you're at the table with a lot of men because your perspective is important too.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's really
I
solid
don't know if
advice.
that's the best advice, but I've heard that from a lot of women, that especially officers being in a room with a lot like mostly men, and the nerves to speak up and say something or share an idea, but it's most likely a good one.
And it would definitely happen a lot in the forces just because of the amount of men compared to women. But to be the only woman sitting at a table full of men and to not be intimidated, because I think sometimes people would be like a woman might be intimidated and be scared to speak up, like, oh, I
Mhm.
don't want them to shut down my idea.
Exactly.
My
Yeah.
experience has all been positive, but I think it's just to have confidence is a
Yeah,
big
and
one
that's
too.
basically what the advice is just
Hmm.
to be confident and know that your voice matters. Yeah, that's what matters at the end of the day. Actually, I do want to change my piece of advice
Yeah,
here.
sure. Yeah.
My advice would be not just to young women, but to women of all ages, is that it's never too late to start something new, whether that's joining the military, whether that's changing your trade within the military, whether that's starting jujitsu. Maybe you want to write a book, just sit down and write it. Don't be afraid to just start something, and also to try a lot of things along the way to figure out what works best for you. I think that's really important. I'm so grateful that I tried jujitsu at 30 and didn't just say, well, no, I'm already too old, and just jump in and just do it, because you can surprise yourself and you can create some really incredible experiences in the military, jujitsu, whatever it may be. So that's my
Hmm.
advice.
I just did PLQ last fall, and there was a woman
Amazing.
who was 57 on PLQ, and she was like one of the most fit people on the course. It was so funny because we'd just be in the field, you've got all this gear on and you're running around and it's late at night and everyone's tired, and she is with a big smile, just like running around in her tack vest, and we're like, holy shit. Like no one has any reason to complain about anything, right?
I do have a second piece of advice,
Yeah,
actually.
for sure.
Something that I really have to thank the military for. It came up in conversation earlier this week, but perseverance to push through the hard stuff. You'll find yourself in a lot of shitty situations in the military, whether it's like -50 in Manitoba and you're laying in the snow watching your arcs,
Hmm.
or you're in Afghanistan or whatever it may be. And it might suck a lot at that moment, but you make it through that and you see the other side. So kind of embracing the suck and pushing through. And I think with my experiences in the military and having that and knowing that now, like in jujitsu, other aspects of my life as well, but with jujitsu, when I'm completely gassed and I feel like I have no more to give, and I'm competing, it's like, you know what, I'm going to keep pushing because it'll be better on the other side. And I know it will be because I've had that experience. So just to embrace the suck and push through it. And that's something the military taught me that now I apply to every aspect of my life. And I think it makes me better for it.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
where can people find you on social media, or do you have an artist website that you could direct people to?
Yeah, I've got my website. It's just www.jessicalynwiebe.com, Wiebe. My Instagram is also my full name, at Jessica Lynn Wiebe.
Do you sell prints or any of your artwork?
Yes, I definitely sell prints, paintings, anything that's on my website. If someone's interested, just message me and we can work something out. I also do commissions. I've made these really neat, actually, talk about jujitsu and art coming together. I started studying like jujitsu technique, and I would watch videos and screenshot different parts of the technique or the sequencing or the rolling, and I started to draw them individually, and then I pieced them together to create my own repeat patterns, which is just like a whole bunch of jujitsu positions kind of mashed together. And then I've transferred them to canvas, and I've painted these camouflage repeat jujitsu pattern paintings, which are kind of neat. And I've had a lot of people reach out for them. So if you want to check those out, they're pretty neat.
Yeah, I saw that was one thing that really drew me to your Instagram page. I saw those and I was like, oh, that's like a really cool camo pattern. And then I looked closer and I'm like, oh, it's little people in there.
It's all reference
Yeah,
from jujitsu technique.
that's awesome. Yeah, very, like super
Yeah.
cool idea.
To do a rash guard or something like.
You should look into that for sure. Like people would be all over it.
Thank you so much, by the
Yeah.
way, and I also really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's going to be a really cool podcast. I can't wait to see how it develops over time.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I hope that,
Yeah.
I hope that it grows and I hope to get more international guests. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to stay up to date with the latest episodes, please hit the subscribe button.